It was a night steeped in a dense fog, the kind that seemed to curl around the trees like spectral fingers, obscuring all but the most immediate of shapes. The road leading to Malgrave Manor was treacherous, its path winding through a forest that was as ancient as time itself. Few dared to tread this path, especially under the cloak of darkness, but curiosity had a way of eclipsing common sense. Julia was a historian by trade, fascinated by tales of forgotten places and the mysteries they held. She had spent months researching Malgrave Manor, a house whispered about in hushed tones, reputed to be cursed or worse, alive in some malevolent sense. The house, it was said, had claimed the lives of all who had attempted to live within its walls. Yet the manor was not abandoned. It was waiting, as if the house itself hungered for the unwary. As Julia approached, the manor loomed before her, a hulking silhouette against the night sky, its windows like empty eye sockets, staring unblinkingly into the abyss. The iron gates creaked open at her touch, as though they had been expecting her arrival. She shivered involuntarily, pulling her coat tighter around her, but continued her ascent up the gravel path that led to the entrance. The door to the manor was ajar, its hinges groaning in protest as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something acrid and metallic. The grand foyer was dimly lit by a chandelier that swayed ever so slightly, despite the absence of any discernible breeze. Dust covered every surface, undisturbed for what seemed like centuries, yet there was an odd sense of vitality about the place, as though the house itself were breathing. Julia's footsteps echoed through the vast emptiness as she moved deeper into the manor, her curiosity driving her forward even as her instincts screamed at her to flee. She passed by rooms filled with antique furniture draped in cobwebs, portraits of long-dead inhabitants whose eyes seemed to follow her every move, and staircases that spiraled into darkness. She was drawn to a particular door at the end of a long corridor. It was slightly ajar, and from within emanated a faint glow as if inviting her to enter. Pushing the door open, Julia found herself in what appeared to be a study, lined with bookshelves crammed with tomes that looked as though they hadn't been touched in centuries. In the center of the room stood an old writing desk, upon which lay a single journal, its leather cover cracked and worn. The journal was open, revealing page after page of meticulous handwriting. Julia's eyes were drawn to the latest entry, dated more than a century ago. The words seemed to leap off the page, as though they had been written for her and her alone. To whomever finds this, know that you are not alone. The house knows you, feels you, feeds off your fear. It will unravel your mind, twist your memories until you are nothing but a husk, a shadow of what you once were. It will show you what you most fear, and when it does, you must not look away, for to do so is to invite madness. The words sent a chill down Julia's spine, but she could not tear her eyes away. As she read on, the room around her began to shift, subtly at first, then more dramatically. The walls seemed to close in on her, the shadows growing darker, more oppressive. She felt a cold hand brush against her cheek and spun around, but there was nothing there. The room was alive with movement now, the very air thick with a sense of malevolence. Julia stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The journal's words echoed in her mind. It will show you what you most fear. A cold dread settled in her stomach as the room began to change before her eyes. The study melted away, replaced by a nightmarish landscape. She was no longer in the manor, but in the middle of a vast, desolate field under a blood-red sky. In the distance, she could see a figure standing alone, its back turned to her. Something about the figure was familiar, but she couldn't place it. Drawn forward by an unseen force, Julia approached the figure. As she drew closer, her breath caught in her throat. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face she knew all too well, her own. The doppelganger smiled, a twisted, malicious grin, and whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." Julia's heart raced as the doppelganger's eyes turned black, voids of endless darkness. She stumbled back, but the field around her began to close in, the sky darkening until it was pitch black. The doppelganger advanced, and with every step, Julia felt her sanity slipping away. Suddenly, the darkness receded, and she was back in the study, the journal clutched in her trembling hands. The room was as it had been before, but something was different. Something was wrong. She felt a presence behind her, cold and malevolent. Slowly she turned around, expecting to see the doppelganger, but instead she found herself staring into the eyes of a man. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing eyes that seemed to look right through her. His expression was one of sorrow, but also of something far darker. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a cold wind blew through the room, carrying with it the sound of whispers, echoes of voices long silenced. Julia's mind reeled as the man stepped closer, his form becoming more transparent with each step. She realized with mounting horror that he wasn't a man at all, but a ghost, a remnant of someone who had once lived and died in this cursed house. The ghost reached out a hand, and Julia felt an icy chill spread through her body as his fingers brushed against her skin. Suddenly, the room began to spin, the walls melting away as the darkness closed in once more. Julia felt herself being pulled into the void, her mind unraveling as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the spinning stopped. Julia found herself standing in the foyer once more, the manor silent and still. The front door was open, the fog outside beckoning her to leave. But as she turned to go, she caught sight of something in the mirror by the door. Her reflection stared back at her, but it wasn't her. The woman in the mirror was older, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes hollow and empty. Julia's breath caught in her throat as she realized with dawning horror that she was looking at herself. Herself as she would be in the future. After years of being trapped in this house, the realization hit her like a physical blow. The house had already claimed her. She had been here for years, perhaps decades, but the manor had twisted her memories, making her believe that she had just arrived. The journal, the ghost, the doppelganger, they were all part of the house's twisted game, designed to break her mind and trap her soul. Julia turned away from the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had to leave, but as she stepped through the door, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder, pulling her back. She tried to fight it, but the force was too strong. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her was her own reflection, smiling back at her from the mirror. And then there was nothing but darkness. Julia was never seen again, her fate a mystery that would remain unsolved. But the manor remained, standing tall and silent, waiting for the next unwary soul to cross its threshold. For Malgrave Manor was more than just a house. It was a predator, a creature that fed on fear and despair, and it was always hungry. So if you ever find yourself wandering the woods near Malgrave Manor, remember this: the house is always waiting, and once it has you in its grasp, it will never let you go. And as for Julia, if you listen closely on a foggy night, you might just hear her screams echoing through the halls of Malgrave Manor, a warning to those who dare to enter. But by then, it will already be too late.